My name is Athena Blackwood, and the night my husband let his boss humiliate me on stage at a luxury gala, I was carrying something in my clutch that would destroy them both. Proof that I owned 67% of the company they claimed I contributed nothing to. For 7 years, I had been the ghost in the machine, building an empire from my kitchen table while Daniel took the credit and the glory. But as I stood there in my black dress, listening to 300 of the city's most powerful people laugh at my erasure, I made a decision that would turn their champagne toasts into bankruptcy notices. What happened when I took that microphone changed everything, not just for the man who betrayed me and the woman who tried to steal my life's work, but for every invisible spouse who ever built a kingdom only to be written out of its history. If you're watching this, drop a comment below about a time when being underestimated became your greatest weapon. The chandelier in our foyer cost more than most people's cars. I remember the day Daniel had it installed. He just closed his first major acquisition, and he wanted something that made a statement. Now, standing beneath its cold light, signing papers that would dissolve everything we'd built together, I wondered if that statement had always been about him, never us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up destroying an empire with a microphone and a manila folder, you need to understand how I helped build it first. Daniel and I met at Northwestern, both of us hungry in that particular way that middle-class kids get when they glimpse real wealth for the first time. He was all ambition and sharp angles, the kind of man who color-coded his law school notes and practiced handshakes in the mirror. I was quieter, studying business administration with a minor in accounting, the daughter of a small-town bank manager who taught me to read financial statements before I could ride a bike. We made sense on paper. Daniel had the charisma, the broad shoulders that looked good in suits, the ability to command a room with his laugh. I had the details, the eye for contracts, the patience for spreadsheets, the inheritance from my grandmother that nobody knew about except my lawyer. When Daniel struggled to launch his consulting firm after graduation, I was the one who suggested we use my connections from my father's banking world. When his first pitch deck fell flat, I rewrote it at 2 a.m., transforming corporate jargon into compelling narrative. "You're my secret weapon, Athena," he used to say, kissing my temple as I hunched over my laptop. Behind every great man, right? I should have paid attention to that phrasing. The firm grew. First one client, then 5, then 50. I incorporated us properly, set up the tax structure, negotiated our office lease, while Daniel was in Cabo with potential investors. I took a 67% stake. My inheritance was our entire seed funding, after all, but kept it quiet. Daniel needed to be the face, the founder, the visionary. I understood that. The business world still responded better to a confident man than a capable woman, and I was practical above all else. We married on our 5th anniversary in a vineyard in Napa that cost a fortune to rent. Daniel's speech made everyone cry. "Athena isn't just my wife," he said, raising his champagne. "She's my foundation, my home, the quiet force that keeps me grounded while I reach for the stars." The photographer caught me dabbing my eyes. I looked so young in that photo, so grateful to be seen. I didn't notice then how he'd still managed to make my contribution sound passive. A foundation stays still while the building rises. For 3 years, it worked. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say, I didn't notice it not working. Daniel's firm merged with a larger consulting group, and suddenly he was senior vice president, then executive vice president. Our house grew from suburban comfortable to suburban estate. The dinner parties shifted from potlucks to catered affairs. And slowly, so slowly, I almost missed it, my voice began to disappear. "Honey, maybe let me handle the Whitman account," Daniel said one evening when I suggested a different approach to their restructuring. "You know how traditional they are about, well, taking advice from wives." "The Patterson deal is pretty much locked," he told colleagues at a dinner party, accepting congratulations for a contract I'd spent 3 weeks negotiating while he was at a conference in Miami. "Athena keeps herself busy with her little projects," he explained to his new boss when she asked what I did, as if my little project wasn't the financial restructuring that had saved his firm from bankruptcy the year before. His boss.
Victoria Carlyle.
"I need you to understand Victoria to understand what came next." She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Sharp features, Silver hair she'd stopped dyeing at 40, angular in the way that expensive clothes love. But she had presence, the kind that made restaurant staff materialize and board members lean forward. She'd built Carlyle Consulting from nothing, or so the story went. In reality, her ex-husband's pharmaceutical fortune had helped, but Victoria had learned to edit her own history until it became legend. She took an interest in Daniel immediately. Finally, she said at their first meeting, which I attended because Daniel had asked me to take notes, someone who understands vision without getting bogged down in pedestrian details. I was sitting right there, laptop open, having just explained the tax implications of the merger she was proposing. But her eyes never left Daniel's face. The late nights started 2 months after he joined her division. Strategy sessions that ran until midnight. Weekend retreats to align vision at her estate in the Hamptons. Daniel would come home exhausted but exhilarated, smelling of wine and Victoria's signature perfume, something French and aggressive. "You're paranoid," my sister Lauren said when I mentioned it over lunch. "Daniel worships you." But worship and respect are different things, aren't they? Daniel still bought me jewelry, still told me I was beautiful, still made love to me with something approaching passion. But he stopped asking my opinion on contracts. He started interrupting me at dinner parties. He laughed, actually laughed, when I suggested I should be listed as co-founder in the new corporate documents. "Come on, Athena. You know how that would look. Like I couldn't have done it on my own." The receipts started appearing in his jacket pockets. Dinners at restaurants I'd mentioned wanting to try, but not with me. Hotel charges in the city, when he was supposedly at the office. A charge for 2 first-class tickets to London when he'd told me he was flying economy to save money. I became a detective in my own home, and I hated myself for it. But I hated the gaslight more, the way he'd make me feel crazy for noticing, needy for asking, small for caring. "Victoria needs strategic partners she can trust," he explained when I found a Cartier receipt that definitely wasn't for my birthday. "Sometimes that means expensive gestures. It's business, Athena. Not everything is about you." The gala invitation came in October, heavy cardstock with gold embossing. "Celebrating excellence in strategic innovation," it read, which was corporate speak for, "Victoria wants to show off." Daniel was being honored for the Patterson deal, my deal, with some made-up award that Victoria's PR team had created. "You have to come," Daniel said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It would look strange if you didn't." I found the dress myself. Black, expensive, understated. Daniel used to help me choose outfits for events, zipping me up while murmuring appreciation. This time, he barely glanced at me before heading to the car. "Try not to talk shop too much tonight," he said as we pulled up to the hotel. "These people want to relax, not hear about spreadsheets." These people, as if I hadn't gone to better schools than half of them, hadn't built the very company they were celebrating. But I smiled and took his arm, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Support.
Sustain.
Stay silent. The valet opened my door, and I stepped out into the November night. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking into the end of my marriage, and the beginning of my life. The Peninsula Hotel had been transformed into something out of a fever dream about wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Orchids flown in from Thailand cascaded from pedestals that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A string quartet played in the corner, their music barely audible over the sound of congratulations and air kisses. I knew most of these people, had known them for years. There was Richard Whitman, whose account I'd saved from regulatory disaster. Jennifer Morrison, who still sent me private thank you emails for the strategy that had doubled her division's revenue. Marcus Bradley, who'd once drunkenly confessed that I was the smartest person in any room but too bad about the whole woman thing. They all looked through me now, their eyes sliding past to find Daniel, to find Victoria, to find anyone who mattered more.
"Athena."
A warm voice broke through my invisibility. Miriam Chen, former CFO, forced into early retirement when she'd questioned too many of Victoria's decisions. She squeezed my hands, her eyes knowing. "You look beautiful, dear. How are you holding up?" Before I could answer honestly, Daniel's hand pressed against my lower back. "Miriam, he said coolly. I didn't expect to see you here. Victoria invited me, Miriam replied, her smile sharp. She said she wanted all the founding family present for this momentous occasion. Her eyes met mine. All the people who built this company from nothing. Daniel's fingers tightened against my spine, a warning. If you'll excuse us, we need to make the rounds. He steered me away, his breath hot against my ear. Stay away from her. She's bitter about being pushed out. She was forced out for asking questions, I whispered back. She was forced out for not being a team player. His smile never wavered as he nodded at passing executives. Something you might want to think about. The threat was so casual, so carelessly delivered, that it took me a moment to process it. By then, he'd already moved on, glad-handing his way toward the bar where Victoria held court. She wore red, because of course she did. The kind of red that demanded attention, that declared war, that matched the lipstick she'd left on Daniel's collar 3 weeks ago, the one he'd claimed was from a client who'd gotten emotional during a meeting. Daniel. She pulled him into an embrace that lasted 2 seconds too long, her hand sliding down his arm possessively. There's my star. And Athena. My name was an afterthought, her eyes already dismissing me. How lovely that you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I managed, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. I'm sure. Victoria's smile could have cut glass. It must be so exciting for you, watching Daniel's success. Not everyone gets a front-row seat to greatness. The group around her tittered, that uncomfortable laugh of people who sense blood in the water but aren't sure if they're predators or prey. Athena knows all about success, Daniel said, but his tone made it sound like a joke. She's been there since the beginning. How sweet, Victoria purred. The supportive wife. Every great man needs one. Someone to keep the home fires burning while he conquers the world. Actually, I started. Oh look, Victoria interrupted. The Hendersons are here. Daniel, we must say hello. They're considering a major contract. She linked her arm through his, pulling him away. Over her shoulder, she added, Athena, dear, I think they're serving the salad course. You wouldn't want to miss your leaves. More laughter, louder this time. I stood alone in a circle of people I'd known for years, holding a champagne flute I didn't want, wearing a dress that suddenly felt like armor made of tissue paper. The dinner was exquisite torture. I was seated at Daniel's table, of course, but at the far end, between a junior analyst who spent the entire time on his phone and someone's plus one who didn't speak English. Daniel sat next to Victoria, their heads bent together, their laughter synchronized. I watched them over courses of food I couldn't taste. Watched her hand rest on his forearm. Watched him lean into her space. Watched everyone else watch them and then glance at me with expressions ranging from pity to schadenfreude. They're not even trying to hide it, the plus one said suddenly in accented English. I turned to stare at her. She shrugged, elegant in her indifference. In my country, we would at least pretend to be discreet. This is, what is the word? Tacky. Yes, I agreed, surprising myself with a laugh. It really is. The speeches started with dessert. Various executives stood to praise innovation, synergy, all the corporate buzzwords that meant nothing and everything. Then Victoria took the stage, and the room fell silent. Tonight, we celebrate excellence, she began, her voice carrying effortlessly. And no one exemplifies excellence quite like Daniel Morrison. Morrison. He'd taken my last name when we married, said it sounded more substantial than his own. Now Victoria wielded it like she owned it. When Daniel joined us, Carlyle Consulting was already successful. But he brought something we desperately needed: vision without baggage, leadership without weakness, the ability to make hard decisions without getting emotional. Her eyes found mine in the crowd. Not everyone has that strength. Some people are meant to lead. Others, well, they're meant to follow. Or better yet, to stay home. The room shifted uncomfortably. This was too direct, too cruel, even for a crowd that fed on professional blood sport. Take the Patterson deal, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. Everyone knows Daniel closed it single-handedly. Oh, I'm sure he had help with the little details. Someone had to format the PowerPoints, after all. She laughed, that tinkling sound that made my teeth ache. But real success requires more than formatting. It requires vision.
Power.
The kind of presence that commands respect. She was looking directly at me now, and so was everyone else. I've known Daniel's wife for years, she said, and my name disappeared entirely. I was just an appendage now, a possessive pronoun. She's lovely, really. So supportive. So quiet. The perfect corporate wife, seen but not heard, present but not participating. Though honestly, Daniel, I sometimes wonder why you bring her to these things at all. What does she actually contribute? The silence was deafening. 300 people holding their breath, waiting to see if I would bleed or break. Daniel stood up. For one moment, one crystalline moment, I thought he was going to defend me. He was going to remember the nights I'd saved his company, the connections I'd made, the money I'd invested. He was going to remember he'd once called me his secret weapon. Instead, he walked to the stage and took the microphone from Victoria with a smile. "You're too kind," he said to her, then turned to the audience. Victoria's right, of course. Success in our industry requires a certain kind of person. Someone who understands that feelings have no place in business. Someone who can separate the personal from the professional. Someone who knows that true power isn't about who you married or what you inherited. It's about what you build yourself. He was rewriting history in real time, erasing my contributions with every word. The inheritance that had funded his company became something to be ashamed of. The marriage that had given him stability became a weakness to overcome. "I'm grateful for everyone who supported me," he continued, his eyes never finding mine. "But at the end of the day, success is a solo journey. You rise or fall on your own merits." Victoria started the applause, and it spread like wildfire through the room. They were clapping for my erasure, for my humiliation, for the public execution of my dignity. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the only power you have is in refusing to give people the reaction they want. But inside, something fundamental was shifting, like tectonic plates realigning before an earthquake. The +1 next to me poured vodka from a flask into my water glass. "For strength," she said simply. I drank it in one burning swallow. Daniel was still talking, thanking people who'd done a fraction of what I'd done, praising Victoria's mentorship, painting a picture of success that wrote me out entirely. And that's when I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned. The seating arrangement, the speeches, the systematic destruction of my reputation. They'd coordinated my humiliation like a hostile takeover. But they'd forgotten something crucial. They'd forgotten that I'd built this company from the ground up, that I'd written the contracts, that I'd structured the deals. They'd forgotten that quiet doesn't mean weak, that silence doesn't mean stupid. Most importantly, they'd forgotten about the papers in my clutch. The ones I'd been carrying for weeks, hoping I'd never need them. The ones that proved I owned 67% of the original company, shares that had been rolled into the merger, protected by clauses I'd written myself. Victoria was back at the microphone now, calling for a toast. "To Daniel," she said, raising her glass. "And to knowing your place in the world." Everyone stood. Everyone except me. "Athena," Daniel hissed from a stage. "Stand up." I did stand then, slowly, deliberately. But instead of raising my glass, I set it down with a soft click that somehow echoed through the room. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying surprisingly well, "I'd like to make a toast of my own." The room froze. Victoria's smile flickered. Daniel went pale. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking against marble, each step measured and certain. The crowd parted like water, their expressions ranging from horrified to fascinated. "After all," I said, climbing the steps to the stage, "it's not every day you get to watch an empire fall." Victoria still held the microphone, her knuckles white around it. For a moment, we stood face to face, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but the first hint that perhaps she'd miscalculated. "I don't think that's appropriate," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "Neither was anything you just said," I replied, holding out my hand. The microphone, please." The room held its breath. 300 of the city's most powerful people, frozen like children watching their parents fight. Victoria glanced at Daniel, who looked like he might vomit on his Italian leather shoes. "Give her the mic," someone called out. Marcus Bradley, of all people, the man who'd lamented my gender. "Let's hear what Athena has to say." The cry was taken up by others, curiosity overcoming propriety. Victoria had no choice. She handed me the microphone with a smile that promised retribution. I'd never stood on a stage like this, never commanded this kind of attention. My hands should have been shaking. Instead, they were steady as stone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice calm, almost conversational. "It's been illuminating watching you celebrate my husband's success, watching you applaud the erasure of my contributions, watching you laugh at the suggestion that I'm nothing more than a decorative accessory." Someone coughed. Ice clinked in glasses. The string quartet had stopped playing. "Victoria asked an excellent question earlier," I continued, making eye contact with her. "What do I actually contribute? Let me answer that with some facts." I opened my clutch and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The one my lawyer had prepared when I'd first suspected this might be necessary. Fact 1. When Daniel Morrison started his consulting firm 7 years ago, he had no capital, no connections, and no clients. I provided the initial investment of $2 million from my inheritance. I incorporated the business, established the tax structure, and negotiated our first office lease. Daniel stepped forward. "Athena, this isn't." Fact 2. I continued, not even glancing at him. "The Patterson deal that Victoria just credited entirely to Daniel? I spent 3 weeks negotiating that contract while Daniel was at a conference in Miami. I have the emails, the call logs, and the signed documents to prove it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jennifer Morrison, no relation to Daniel, despite the shared surname, nodded slowly, remembering. Fact 3. The Whitman account that saved this company from bankruptcy 2 years ago? I identified the regulatory issues, developed the restructuring plan, and presented it to their board. Daniel was in the Hamptons that weekend. With Victoria, as it happens. Victoria's face had gone from red to white. "These are baseless accusations." Fact 4. I said, raising my voice just slightly. "And this is my favorite one. When Carlyle Consulting merged with Morrison Strategic Partners 18 months ago, the deal was structured to preserve existing ownership stakes. I own 67% of Morrison Strategic Partners." The room erupted. People pulled out phones, frantically Googling, texting their lawyers, trying to verify what I'd just said. "That's impossible," Daniel sputtered. "The merger documents." "The merger documents that I reviewed and amended?" I pulled out another paper. "The ones with the preservation clause in subsection 47C that you didn't bother to read because you were too busy celebrating with champagne at La Bernardine?" I held up the document, though most people couldn't read it from their seats. They didn't need to. The look on Daniel's face told them everything. "Now," I said, turning back to the audience, "let me explain what this means in practical terms. 67% of Morrison Strategic Partners represents approximately 41% of the merged entity. Not a controlling stake, but certainly significant. Worth approximately $207 million at current valuation." Someone whistled low and appreciative. "For years," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I've been told I contribute nothing. I've been edited out of my own story, erased from my own success. I've watched my husband accept praise for my work while treating me like an embarrassment. I've listened to his boss, his mistress, mock me publicly while he stood by in silence." Victoria started to speak, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "You had your turn. You stood on this stage and tried to humiliate me in front of everyone who matters in this industry. You called me decorative, useless, a burden. You did it deliberately, with malice, with my husband's full cooperation." I turned to Daniel then, really looked at him for the first time all evening. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished, like a suit that had been tailored for someone else. "Did you think I was stupid, Daniel? Or just weak?" Did you think I'd built your company, saved your contracts, and protected your interests for 7 years without learning anything? Without keeping records? Without protecting myself? Athena, please, he said, and his voice cracked. We can discuss this privately. The way you discussed your affair with Victoria privately?
I asked.
Oh, yes, I know about that too. The hotel charges, the weekend trips, the Cartier bracelet, that certainly wasn't for me. Though I have to say, charging your mistress's jewelry to the company card shows a spectacular lack of judgment. The kind that might interest the board of directors. The board members present were already on their phones, voices urgent and low. Victoria's empire, built on perception and power, was cracking in real time. But here's the thing, I said, addressing the room again. I'm not vindictive. I don't want to destroy anyone out of spite. I just want what's mine. And, effective immediately, I'm exercising my rights as a major shareholder. I pulled out the final document, the one Asha had prepared that afternoon when I'd finally decided enough was enough. I'm calling for an emergency board meeting to review the company's financial practices, particularly the unauthorized personal expenses charged to corporate accounts. I'm also liquidating my stake. I've already received 3 competitive offers, including one from Meridian Capital that values my shares at a 15% premium. The Meridian Capital representatives, who'd been quietly sitting at table 12, stood up and nodded. I'd invited them myself, though Daniel hadn't noticed their names on the guest list he'd never bothered to review. You can't do this, Victoria said, but her voice had lost all its power. It will destroy the company's value.
No, incorrecta.
Your financial misconduct will destroy the company's value. My liquidation is just a business decision. The kind that requires vision, power, and presence. The kind that doesn't care about feelings. I set the microphone down on the podium with deliberate care. Oh, and Daniel? I said, my voice carrying even without amplification. I'll be staying at the Ritz tonight. Have my things sent over. All of them, including the files in the safe. Combination July 15th, 82. Your mother's birthday, in case you've forgotten that too. I walked off the stage then, my heels clicking against marble, my head high. The crowd parted again, but this time with something approaching respect. Or maybe it was just shock. Either way, I'd take it. Behind me, chaos erupted. Board members demanding answers, investors calling their lawyers, reporters who'd been covering a puff piece suddenly realizing they had tomorrow's front page. Miriam intercepted me at the door, her eyes bright with something like pride. That was magnificent, she said simply. That was just the beginning, I replied. My phone was already buzzing. Asha, my lawyer, texting that she'd watched the live stream, because of course Victoria had arranged for the event to be live streamed, expecting to document Daniel's triumph, and was ready with the filing for tomorrow morning. The forensic accountant I'd hired 3 weeks ago, confirming he'd found what we'd suspected in the offshore accounts. My sister, sending a series of exclamation points and heart emojis. But the call I accepted was from James Whitman, Richard's son, and heir apparent to the Whitman fortune. Athena, he said without preamble. Meridian isn't the only one interested in your shares. Let's talk about a better offer. One that includes a board seat and a consulting contract. Your own consulting contract. I stood in the November cold, watching Daniel through the hotel's glass doors as he gestured frantically at Victoria as she turned away from him as their empire began its collapse. I'm listening, I said, because that's what I'd always been, the one who listened, who watched, who waited. But I'd also been the one who learned, who planned, who prepared. They tried to erase me from my own story. Instead, I'd just ridden them out of mine. The valet brought my car. I'd driven myself, knowing how this night would end. As I pulled away from the peninsula, I caught a glimpse of Daniel in the rearview mirror, standing on the sidewalk, his phone pressed to his ear, his perfect suit somehow wrinkled, his commanding presence reduced to desperate gestures. For 7 years, I'd been his secret weapon. Now I was his reckoning. And I was just getting started. The Ritz suite was a sanctuary of silence after the chaos of the peninsula. I'd booked it 3 weeks ago under my maiden name, Athena Blackwood, paying in cash from an account Daniel didn't know existed. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd chosen the hotel where he'd first brought Victoria, according to the credit card statements. Now it would be where I orchestrated their downfall. I set my phone on the marble counter and watched it light up like a switchboard gone haywire. 43 missed calls from Daniel. 18 from unknown numbers, likely board members or reporters. A stream of texts ranging from threatening to pleading, each one a testament to how quickly power shifts when you hold the right cards. The first knock came at 11:47 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw someone unexpected. Evan Hartley, a junior analyst from Daniel's team. The kid who used to bring me coffee during those late nights when I was basically running the company from our kitchen table. He stood in the hallway, shifting his weight nervously, a manila envelope clutched against his chest. I opened the door on the chain. Evan. Mrs. Morrison, I mean Ms. Blackwood. He'd clearly been watching the live stream too. I'm sorry to bother you, but I couldn't let them do this. Do what? He glanced down the hallway nervously. Victoria called an emergency meeting after you left. She's planning to transfer the discretionary funds tonight, about $18 million, to offshore accounts. She says it's for operational security, but we all know she's rabbit-holing the money. I studied his face. He was young, maybe 26, with a kind of earnest expression that wouldn't last long in this industry. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only person who ever treated me like I mattered, he said simply. And because what they did tonight was wrong. Everyone knows you built that company. We used to call you the Ghost CEO, the one who actually got things done while Mr. Morrison took the credit.
Ghost CEO.
I almost smiled. I have the transfer authorizations, he continued, sliding the envelope under the door. And something else. A recording from last Tuesday's strategy meeting. You should hear what they said about you when they thought no one was recording. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Evan, this could end your career. My career at a corrupt company that publicly humiliates the person who built it. He shrugged. I'll take my chances. Besides, Whitman Industries is hiring. James Whitman already called me. Smart kid. He'd picked the winning side before the war was even over. After he left, I opened my laptop and initiated a video call with Asha Mehta, my lawyer. She answered immediately, looking perfectly composed despite the late hour. Behind her, I could see two other associates and what looked like a forensic accountant. I'm watching the situation unfold, she said without preamble. We need to move fast. I'm filing for a temporary restraining order to freeze all non-operational asset transfers. Judge Harrison owes me a favor. We'll have it signed within the hour. Evan Hartley just delivered evidence of Victoria planning to transfer $18 million offshore. Perfect. That's criminal fraud if she tries it now, knowing about your ownership stake and pending board action. Asha's smile was sharp. I'm also filing the 13D amendment with the SEC tonight, announcing your intent to divest. The market will know by morning. What about Daniel? I've already sent a notice of breach to his employment contract. Conflict of interest, fiduciary duty violation, and misuse of corporate funds. If the board doesn't fire him, they're opening themselves to shareholder lawsuits. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They're in the garage trying to access the backup servers.
Miriam.
Of course she still had sources inside. Asha, they're trying to delete records. Let them try, she said calmly. I had everything backed up to a secure cloud 3 hours before the gala. Every email, every transaction, every deleted file. I may have also hired someone to install a perfectly legal monitoring system on the public areas of the building 2 weeks ago. If they're destroying evidence, we'll have video. I'd chosen my lawyer well. Another knock at the door, this one more insistent. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel, disheveled and desperate. I know you're in there, Athena, he called through the door. We need to talk. I'm recording this interaction, I called back. And my lawyer is on video. Do you still want to talk? Silence. Then, please, just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but left the chain on. He looked terrible, tie askew, hair mussed, the golden boy finally tarnished. How could you do this? He asked, and the audacity of that question almost made me laugh. How could I? You stood on that stage and let Victoria humiliate me. You erased 7 years of my work. You had an affair with your boss and charged her jewelry to the company account. We weren't. He stopped, apparently realizing that denial was pointless. You don't understand. Victoria owns this city. If you go against her, she'll destroy you. She already tried that tonight, remember? How did that work out? His face flushed. This is different. She has connections, influence. She has $18 million in fraudulent transfers and a paper trail of embezzlement, I interrupted. What she doesn't have is 67% of the original company. Or a legal team that's been preparing for this moment for 3 weeks. Or the respect of anyone who watched that live stream. I'll give you whatever you want, he said desperately. The house, the cars, the vacation properties. Those are already mine, I said. Community property, remember? What I want is my company's shares at market value, plus the premium for the governance reforms I'm proposing. Meridian already offered 15% above market. James Whitman is suggesting 20%. His voice cracked. That would bankrupt me. No, Daniel. Your lifestyle bankrupted you. Your ego bankrupted you. Your choices bankrupted you. I'm just collecting what's mine. He slammed his palm against the door frame. You vindictive. Careful. Asha's voice came from my laptop. Threatening behavior is also grounds for a restraining order. Daniel stepped back, his face cycling through anger, fear, and finally, something like grief. I loved you, he said quietly. You loved the idea of me, I corrected. The supportive wife who made you look good. The moment I became inconvenient, you tried to erase me. That's not love, Daniel. That's ownership. And I'm no longer for sale. I closed the door on his face and turned back to my laptop. The TRO just came through, Asha announced. Victoria's frozen. If she tries to transfer those funds now, it's a federal crime. My phone rang. James Whitman. Athena, I've just had a fascinating conversation with 3 other board members. We're prepared to call an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. Can you be there? With bells on, I said.
Good.
And Athena? That was the most impressive thing I've seen in 20 years of business. My father sends his regards and wants to know if you'd consider running our new consulting division. Let's get through tomorrow first, I said, but I was already thinking 3 moves ahead. By 3 a.m., the chess pieces were all in position. The restraining order was in place. The SEC filing was submitted. The board meeting was called. 3 major investment firms had expressed interest in my shares. And according to Miriam's sources, Victoria was at her lawyer's office, trying to figure out how to save herself. I stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, and thought about the woman I'd been just 12 hours ago. The one who'd zipped up her own dress because her husband couldn't be bothered. The one who'd sat silent while being mocked. The one who'd spent 7 years being slowly erased. That woman was gone. Or maybe she'd never really existed at all. Maybe she'd always been this, strategic, powerful, patient, waiting for the right moment to stop being the secret weapon and become the one holding it. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Evan. You should know, Daniel's trying to get the IT department to delete the email servers. But the IT director, Sandra? She's already backing everything up. She said to tell you the Go CEO has more supporters than you know. I smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time all night. They'd tried to make me invisible. Instead, they'd made me unstoppable. The conference call began at 7:30 a.m. sharp, with over 3,000 investors and analysts dialed in. I sat in the Ritz suite, surrounded by documents, with Asha beside me and a court reporter transcribing every word. The chat window exploded the moment I began speaking. Good morning, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. My name is Athena Blackwood, and I am the majority owner of the entity that became Morrison Strategic Partners, now merged with Carlyle Consulting. I'm here to discuss serious governance concerns and provide documentation of financial irregularities that shareholders need to know. I share my screen, displaying the first document, a series of invoices from shell companies, all approved by Victoria, all co-signed by Daniel. These invoices, totaling approximately $12 million over 18 months, are for consulting services that were never rendered. The companies listed don't exist except on paper. They're registered to addresses that trace back to Victoria Carlisle's family office in Delaware. The chat erupted. Analysts were typing furiously, their messages flying by. Is this embezzlement? SEC investigation incoming. Stock will tank it open. Asha leaned into the microphone. I'm Asha Mehta, legal counsel for Ms. Blackwood. We've submitted all documentation to the appropriate regulatory bodies. We're not making accusations, we're presenting facts with supporting evidence. I clicked to the next document. This is an email thread from 6 months ago, where Victoria explicitly instructs Daniel to route personal expenses through the offshore vendor codes. The thread includes receipts for private jet travel to St. Bart's, a yacht rental in Monaco, and yes, a $40,000 Cartier bracelet. Someone unmuted their line. A major institutional investor. Ms. Blackwood, are you suggesting that Victoria Carlisle has been embezzling from her own company? I'm showing you documented evidence of financial irregularities, I replied carefully. The legal authorities will determine the appropriate classifications. Another voice. What about Daniel Morrison? What's his involvement? I pulled up the next document, my chest tight. This was the hardest part, not because I felt bad for Daniel, but because it was proof of how blind I'd been. Mr. Morrison co-signed every one of these transactions. He also received kickbacks totaling approximately $3 million deposited into a personal account he didn't disclose on his financial statements. An account. I paused for effect. That was open the week after he started reporting to Victoria Carlisle. The sound of keyboards clicking was audible through multiple open lines. The financial press was having a field day. Ms. Blackwood, another analyst asked, what are you seeking here? Transparency, accountability, and a fair market value for my shares, which I'm divesting immediately. I've received several offers, all contingent on governance reforms that would prevent this kind of misconduct in the future. Can you elaborate on these reforms? Independent board oversight. Forensic audit of all transactions over $50,000 for the past 3 years. Separation of the CEO and chairman roles. And immediate termination of any executives involved in financial misconduct. The line went quiet for a moment, then exploded with questions. I answered them calmly, methodically, with Asha jumping in for legal clarifications. By the time we ended the call at 8:15, Carlisle Consulting's pre-market trading showed a 30% drop. The boardroom at Carlisle Consulting was on the 40th floor, all glass and chrome and desperate power. I walked in at 8:25, 5 minutes early, with Asha on my right and Miriam on my left. The board was already assembled, their faces ranging from furious to frightened. Victoria sat at the head of the table, still trying to project authority despite the fact that her empire was crumbling. Daniel sat to her right, hollow-eyed and silent. They'd both clearly been up all night. This is an ambush, Victoria said before anyone else could speak. Athena has no standing to call this meeting. Actually, said Thomas Brennan, the lead independent director, any shareholder with more than 10% ownership can call an emergency meeting with proper notice. Ms. Blackwood owns 41% of the merged entity. She has more standing than anyone in this room. I took a seat directly across from Victoria. Would you like to explain the $18 million you tried to transfer to the Cayman Islands at 2 a.m. this morning? That was a routine operational transfer. That was stopped by a federal restraining order. Asha interrupted, sliding copies of the order across the table. Any attempt to move those funds now would be criminal. Board member Patricia Hoffman, someone I'd always respected, looked at Victoria with disgust. You tried to rabbit hole $18 million while under federal scrutiny? I was protecting the company's assets. You were stealing them, Miriam said quietly. She opened a binder that looked like it had been waiting for this moment for years. Just like you did in 2019 with the Berkshire account, 2020 with the Phoenix merger, 2021 with the Regulatory Settlement Fund. I documented everything before you forced me out. The room went silent. Miriam pushed the binder to Thomas Brennan. I kept copies of everything, she continued. Every questionable transaction, every offshore transfer, every ghost invoice. I tried to warn you all, but Victoria convinced you I was just a bitter old woman who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. Patricia Hoffman was paging through the binder, her face growing paler with each page. This is systematic fraud. Going back years. Which brings us to Mr. Morrison, I said, turning to Daniel. Would you like to explain your kickback arrangement? Or should I play the recording from Tuesday's strategy meeting? Daniel's lawyer, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. My client exercises his Fifth Amendment rights. This isn't a criminal proceeding, Thomas Brennan interrupted.
Yet.
But if Mr. Morrison won't explain himself to the board, that tells us everything we need to know. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording Evan had given me. Victoria's voice filled the room. Once Athena is completely sidelined, we can restructure the ownership documents. She's too trusting to have maintained proper records. Daniel, you'll need to convince her to sign over her shares for tax purposes. If she resists, we'll make her life difficult enough that she'll be happy to walk away with whatever we offer. Daniel's voice responded. She won't fight back. She never does. Besides, after tonight, her reputation will be so damaged that no one will take her seriously even if she tries. I stopped the recording. The room was tomb silent. Motion to remove Victoria Carlyle as CEO, effective immediately, Patricia Hoffman said. Seconded, said two other board members simultaneously. Motion to terminate Daniel Morrison for cause, citing breach of fiduciary duty and violation of his employment agreement, Thomas Brennan added. Seconded. The votes were unanimous, except for Victoria and Daniel, who weren't allowed to vote on their own terminations. Motion to appoint Miriam Chen as interim CEO while we conduct a search, Patricia continued. Miriam shook her head. I appreciate the confidence, but I'm 72. I'll serve as interim chair, but you need someone younger, hungrier, and frankly more vindictive than I am as CEO. She looked at me. Someone who knows this company inside and out. I'm liquidating my shares, I reminded her. To Whitman Industries, as I understand it, Thomas Brennan said. James Whitman has already informed us that if the deal goes through, he wants you as CEO of the combined entity. He says you're the only person who actually understands both companies' real value. I sat back, letting that sink in. From erased wife to potential CEO in less than 12 hours. There's one more matter, Asha said. The clawback provisions in both Victoria and Daniel's contracts. Given the evidence of fraud, the company can recover all compensation paid during the period of misconduct. We're talking about approximately $43 million. Victoria stood up, her composure finally cracking. You can't do this. I built this company. With your ex-husband's money, Miriam interrupted. And then you built your personal fortune with the company's money. There's a poetic justice to that, don't you think? Security entered the room. Apparently, someone had called them in advance. Ms. Carlyle, Mr. Morrison, the head of security said. I'll need your key cards, company phones, and laptops. We've already changed your access codes. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw him finally understand. All those nights I'd spent reviewing contracts, all those details he dismissed as unimportant, all those protections I'd built into the structure, they hadn't been for him. They'd been for this moment. You planned this, he said, his voice hollow. You've been planning this for months.
No, y correcte.
I planned for the possibility that the man I loved might betray me. I hoped I'd never need these safeguards. But when you stood on that stage and let Victoria humiliate me, when you joined in, you activated every contingency I'd put in place. This is my company, Victoria said, her voice rising. My name is on the building. Your name is on a lease, I said calmly. A lease that can be terminated for cause, including criminal misconduct by senior executives. Section 37 of the agreement you signed but apparently didn't read. As security escorted them out, Victoria turned back one last time. You've destroyed everything.
No, I said.
You destroyed everything. I'm just documenting it properly. The boardroom door closed behind them with a definitive click. Thomas Brennan cleared his throat.
Well,
I think we need to discuss the Whitman offer. And Ms. Blackwood? We owe you an apology. And probably hazard pay for what you've endured. I'll take the apology, I said. But the hazard pay? That's what the 20% premium is for. For the first time in years, the boardroom filled with genuine laughter. 3 weeks later, the SEC announced its formal investigation. The FBI followed 2 days after that, having found evidence of wire fraud in the offshore transfers. Victoria Carlisle's attorney released a statement saying she would vigorously defend herself against these baseless accusations, but the security footage of her attempting to shred documents at 3 a.m. suggested otherwise. Daniel's fall was quieter, but more complete. The forensic audit revealed not just the $3 million in kickbacks, but a pattern of expense fraud going back years. That conference in Miami? He'd taken Victoria to a couple's resort. The client dinners he'd expensed? Date nights at restaurants where the sommelier knew Victoria's favorite wine by heart. He tried to negotiate, of course. His lawyer reached out to Asha with offers, each more desperate than the last. He'd return the money. He'd sign whatever NDA I wanted. He'd disappear completely if I just dropped the criminal referral. My client's position is clear, Asha told them. Full accountability.
No exceptions.
The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 1 month after the gala. I wore the same black dress, because symbolism matters in these things. Daniel showed up in a suit that had seen better days, his golden boy shine completely tarnished. Before we begin, the mediator said, Mr. Morrison has requested 5 minutes to speak with Ms. Blackwood privately. Asha started to object, but I touched her arm. It's fine. We sat in a small conference room, the same kind where we'd once planned our future together. Daniel looked older, diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. I'm sorry, he said, and for once, it sounded genuine. Not for the affair, I'm sorry for that too, but for what I said on that stage. For letting Victoria, for joining in.
Why?
I asked, genuinely curious. What was worth destroying our marriage, your career, everything? He was quiet for a long moment. She made me feel important, powerful, like I was the kind of man who could build empires instead of just managing someone else's success. You mean my success? Yes. He met my eyes. Your success. You were always smarter than me, Athena. More capable, more strategic. And instead of being proud of that, I resented it. Victoria saw that resentment and fed it until it consumed everything. That's not an excuse, Daniel.
No, it's not.
It's just the truth. He pulled out an envelope. I'm not supposed to give you this. My lawyer would kill me, but Evan Hartley isn't the only one with a conscience. Inside was a USB drive. Every email between Victoria and me, he said, including the ones where we discussed sabotaging your reputation before the gala, where she outlined her plan to force you out completely and steal your shares. Her exact words were, once she's broken, she'll sign anything. I pocketed the drive. Why are you giving me this? Because I was a terrible husband, but I don't want to be a complete monster. He stood to leave, then paused. The company you're building with Whitman? It's going to be extraordinary. You were always meant to run an empire, Athena. I just wish I'd been smart enough to be your partner instead of your obstacle. He left without waiting for a response, which was good, because I didn't have one. The mediation itself was anticlimactic. Faced with the new evidence, Daniel agreed to everything. The forfeiture of his severance, the clawback of his bonuses, the permanent ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and the car he'd owned before we met. Victoria's situation was worse. The criminal investigation uncovered fraud going back a decade, involving 3 other companies she'd previously run into the ground. The FBI froze her assets, including the house in the Hamptons where she'd entertained Daniel while I was home reviewing contracts. The week before Christmas, I stood in front of another audience, this time as the newly appointed CEO of Whitman Blackwood Consulting. Yes, I'd insisted on the name change. James Whitman had laughed and agreed immediately. My first act as CEO, I announced to the assembled employees, is to institute a new policy. Every contribution to this company will be documented, credited, and compensated appropriately. No more ghost work. No more invisible labor. If you build something here, your name goes on it. The applause was genuine this time. Miriam had taken over as chair of the renamed Blackwood Strategic. Victoria's name had been scrubbed from everything within days. She'd called me the week before with an update. Daniel applied for a position at a small firm in Chicago, she said. They called for a reference. What did you tell them? The truth. That he's brilliant at taking credit for other people's work and has a weakness for powerful women who flatter his ego. Harsh.
Honest.
They didn't hire him. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction at that. The transformation of Whitman Blackwood was swift and decisive. I hired Evan Hartley as my chief of staff. Promoted Sandra from IT to chief technology officer. Brought in a new CFO who'd been blackballed by Victoria years ago for asking too many questions. But the real satisfaction came from the foundation I established, the Ghost CEO Fund, providing legal and financial support for spouses, primarily women, who'd been economically abused or had their contributions erased from their own success stories. The first recipient was a woman whose husband had built a tech startup with her inheritance and coding skills, then divorced her and claimed she'd contributed nothing. You give me hope, she said, crying in my office. That it's possible to fight back and win. It's possible, I assured her. But you need 3 things: documentation, good lawyers, and the willingness to burn it all down if necessary. 6 months after the gala, I received an unexpected call. Victoria, calling from federal prison where she was serving 3 to 5 for wire fraud. Come to gloat, she asked when I sat across from her in the visiting room.
No.
I came to understand. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Understand what? How I fell from grace. How you destroyed me. How someone as smart as you made such stupid decisions. She was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. I got comfortable. Arrogant. I thought because I'd been stepping on people for 20 years without consequences, I was untouchable. And you.
She studied me.
I underestimated you. I saw supportive wife and thought weak. That was my fatal error. That and the embezzlement. That too. She leaned back. You want to know the ironic part? I actually respected you. Your mind, your strategic thinking. If I hadn't been sleeping with your husband, we might have been allies. But you were sleeping with my husband.
Yes.
And that made you the enemy. She stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, Daniel was terrible in bed. All performance, no substance. Rather like his business acumen. I laughed despite myself. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday. I signed the papers in my new office. Overlooking the city I now had a small part in running. Daniel had moved to Seattle, supposedly working as an independent consultant. The last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment and driving for Uber on weekends to make ends meet. My phone rang. James Whitman. The Journal wants to do a profile, he said. The woman who brought down Carlisle Consulting and rebuilt it better. Interested. Will they use my name this time? He laughed. Your name is going to be in the headline. That evening, I had dinner with my sister Lauren at the same restaurant where Daniel had taken Victoria while I was at home, invisible and invaluable. The maitre d' recognized me, his face flushing. Ms. Blackwood, I owe you an apology. The nights Mr. Morrison was here with, well, we should have said something. You were doing your job, I said simply. Though I'll take that table by the window. The one they always requested. As we ate, Lauren raised her glass. To visibility. To documentation, I countered. To revenge served at exactly the right temperature, she added with a grin. We clinked glasses, and I realized something had shifted in the past 6 months. The anger had faded, replaced by something better. Purpose. A young woman approached our table hesitantly. Ms. Blackwood? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was at the gala that night. What you did, it changed my life. I went home and started documenting every contribution I make at my company. Every idea, every late night, every solution I provide that my boss takes credit for. And I just got promoted. with a 50% raise. Because when they tried to promote someone else, I had receipts. She walked away and Lauren smiled at me. You know you're going to be getting those for the rest of your life, right? Women telling you how you inspired them to fight back. There are worse legacies, I said. 1 year to the day after the gala, I stood on another stage, this time giving the keynote at the Women in Business Summit. The crowd was 3 times the size of that night at the Peninsula, but this time, they were there for me. Not as someone's wife, not as the invisible support system, but as Athena Blackwood, CEO and founder of the Ghost CEO Fund. A year ago, someone asked me what I actually contribute. The question was meant to humiliate me, to erase me, to reduce me to nothing. But it was the best question anyone ever asked me. Because in answering it, I discovered that I hadn't just contributed. I had built, created, and sustained an empire while being told I was decorative. The audience was silent, rapt. Many of you have been told you contribute nothing, that your work is invisible, unimportant, that you're lucky to be in the room at all. I'm here to tell you that's a lie.
Document everything.
Value your work. And if someone tries to erase you from your own story, I paused, meeting eyes across the room. Write them out of yours instead. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, at the reception, I saw a familiar figure at the bar. Daniel, grayer than I remembered, wearing a suit that had seen better days. Security? My assistant asked quietly. No, it's fine. He approached carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. I wasn't going to come, but I needed to hear that speech.
Why?
Because I'm trying to be better. To understand what I did, what I became.
He pulled out a check.
It's not much, but I want to contribute to the Ghost CEO Fund. Anonymously. I looked at the amount. $5,000. For the Daniel I'd known, that was pocket change. For whoever he was now, it was probably significant. I'll make sure it goes to someone who needs it, I said. He nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. You look happy, Athena. Really happy. Not the kind you perform for others, but the real kind. I am, I said simply. Good. That's good. He left, and I watched him go, feeling nothing but a distant kind of pity. He'd had everything, a brilliant wife, a successful company, a future, and he'd thrown it away for the validation of a woman who was using him as much as he was using me. My phone buzzed. A text from James Whitman. Fortune 500 board position just opened up. Interested. I typed back. Send me the details. Because that's who I was now. Not the woman behind the man, not the ghost in the machine, but the one making decisions, taking credit, and building empires with my name on them. The gala that was meant to destroy me had instead been my chrysalis. And I'd emerged not as a butterfly. Butterflies are too delicate, but as something with sharper edges and stronger wings. A dragon, perhaps. Dragons, after all, don't just survive being burned. They do the burning. And they always keep the receipts. Have you ever stayed silent while someone took credit for your work? And what would you do differently if you could go back to that moment? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the moment when the underestimated finally take back their power.